I don't come into any fight with any other mindset than to just kick it.
Brock Lesnar has always been brutally honest, with no filters and no sugarcoating. Now that honesty has him exposing the scary truth about Hulk Hogan. According to Lesnar, the so-called American hero isn't who fans thought he was. He's been dabbling in some of the dirtiest politics in WWE history. I've got all the details. Let's break it down. The Beast's silent condemnation. Lesnar, a man who famously declared,
I really don't like people. I'm sorry, I don't.
Would become the unwitting spokesperson for an entire generation of wrestlers who had grown tired of Hulk Hogan's stranglehold on professional wrestling. To understand the magnitude of what Lesnar represented, we must first examine the landscape he entered. Hulk Hogan's WWE career revolutionized wrestling, transforming it from regional territories into a global entertainment powerhouse during the 1980s Hulkamania era. His larger-than-life persona, complete with red and yellow gear, bandana, mustache, and catchphrases like "brother," made him a cultural icon. However, this same success bred widespread resentment among wrestlers, fans, and insiders who witnessed firsthand Hogan's ego-driven behavior that prioritized personal gain over the industry's health. The contrast between these two titans couldn't have been starker. While Hogan built his empire on charisma and political maneuvering, Lesnar represented something entirely different. Pure, unadulterated authenticity. Lesnar declared with characteristic bluntness. This wasn't the manufactured persona of a character designed to sell merchandise and manipulate crowds. This was a legitimate fighter who had conquered every mountain placed before him. Lesnar's achievements were undeniable. NCAA Division I heavyweight wrestling champion, youngest WWE champion in history at the time, and UFC heavyweight champion, a trifecta of accomplishments that no other performer in wrestling history could claim. More importantly, these weren't political victories handed down by backstage power brokers. They were earned through blood, sweat, and an almost inhuman level of physical dominance. The first public glimpse of tension between these wrestling philosophies came during a seemingly innocuous encounter in 2002. During their SmackDown match on August 8, 2002, Lesnar dominated Hogan in what was designed as a warm-up to build Lesnar's credibility before facing The Rock. But what transpired in that ring was more than just a passing of the torch. It was a symbolic dismantling of everything Hogan represented. Lesnar disrespected Hogan by shoving him across the ring and removing his bandana in the opening lockup. Despite Hogan's brief comebacks, including his trademark Hulk-up sequence, Lesnar won via technical submission with a bear hug, making Hogan pass out. The post-match beating was perhaps even more telling. Lesnar smashed Hogan's head with a steel chair, leaving him bloodied and smeared in his own blood as a message to The Rock. This wasn't simply a scripted wrestling match, it was a philosophical statement. Here was a legitimate athlete, someone who had proven himself in the most unforgiving arena of competitive sports, systematically dismantling the manufactured mythology of professional wrestling's most celebrated performer. The match was positively received by fans, with many noting Hogan's size making Lesnar look normal despite Lesnar's dominance. But the real revelation of Lesnar's true feelings toward Hogan wouldn't come until over a decade later, in a moment that crystallized years of industry frustration into a single devastating line. The date was August 11, 2014, and WWE was celebrating Hogan's 61st birthday on Monday Night Raw. The segment was designed as a feel-good nostalgia fest, with legends like Ric Flair, Roddy Piper, and Scott Hall in attendance. What followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as entertainment. As Lesnar and his advocate Paul Heyman interrupted the celebration to promote Lesnar's upcoming SummerSlam match against John Cena, something extraordinary happened. Lesnar circled the ring, staring down legends, until he stopped at Hogan and growled, "Party's over, Grandpa." Heyman, ever the opportunist, added insult to injury with his taunting, "What you gonna do, Hulkster?" The line was reportedly unscripted, added by Lesnar on the spot, which infuriated Hogan backstage. TMZ reported it as apparent real heat, with sources saying Hogan was legit furious over the disrespect. John Cena allegedly had to rush in and calm Hogan down, both on camera and behind the scenes. This moment represented far more than a simple insult. It was the culmination of decades of simmering resentment from wrestlers who had watched Hogan manipulate his way to the top, while more deserving performers were left behind. Lesnar's "Party's over, Grandpa" wasn't just an ad-lib. It was a generational declaration that the era of politics over performance was ending. To understand why this moment resonated so so powerfully throughout the wrestling community, we must go through Hogan's controversial legacy. In 1986, before WrestleMania 2, Hogan reportedly informed Vince McMahon about Jesse Ventura's efforts to unionize wrestlers for better pay, health benefits, and protections. This betrayal thwarted improvements for the entire locker room, where Hogan earned more at WrestleMania 3 than everyone else combined, including Andre the Giant. The union betrayal was revealed under oath during McMahon's 1994 trial, leading to Jesse Ventura's departure from WWF and long-term resentment throughout the industry. For wrestlers who suffered without proper health care, retirement benefits, or basic protections, Hogan's actions weren't just selfish, they were actively harmful to their livelihoods and well-being. Lesnar's approach to the business stood in stark contrast to this political maneuvering. He declared with characteristic directness, "There were no empty promises of brotherhood, no manufactured emotions designed to manipulate audience sympathy." Lesnar offered something that had become increasingly rare in professional wrestling: honesty about his motivations and capabilities. This authenticity extended to every aspect of Lesnar's presentation. While Hogan built his career on catchphrases and superhero-like comebacks, Lesnar's interviews were studies in brutal honesty.
I'm not a man of many words, all right? That's why I have a guy that does all my talking for me.
He explained when asked about his psychological approach to opponents.
I can't answer that. I'm not out there to feel another man's emotion. I mean, that's ridiculous.
He continued, dismissing the manufactured drama that formed the backbone of sports entertainment. Perhaps most tellingly, Lesnar's physical presence in wrestling rings served as a constant reminder of what legitimate athletic achievement looked like. Joe Rogan and Hulk Hogan themselves discussed Lesnar's incredible physical attributes during a podcast appearance, with Rogan noting that Lesnar's NFL Combine numbers included a 4.7-second 40-yard dash at 283 pounds, a 35-inch vertical jump, and 30 repetitions of 225 pounds on the bench press.
Like, you don't understand what that guy did. Like, what that guy did is nothing short of insanity. Like, no one's ever done that before.
Rogan explained, referring to Lesnar's transition from professional wrestling to UFC heavyweight champion.
He's a monster, brother.
He's a monster.
He still is. Still is.
So he's like the biggest genetic freak maybe I've ever seen in the sport.
Hogan himself acknowledged. This acknowledgement from Hogan was particularly significant because it represented a rare moment of honesty about the gap between his own manufactured persona and Lesnar's legitimate athletic achievements. While Hogan built his career on the illusion of superhuman strength and endurance, Lesnar possessed actual superhuman physical capabilities that had been tested and proven in the most demanding competitive environments. The politics of destruction. The deeper we delve into the relationship between Brock Lesnar and Hulk Hogan, the more apparent it becomes that their conflict represented something far more significant than a simple generational clash. It was, at its core, a battle between two fundamentally different philosophies of what professional wrestling should be, and more importantly, what kind of person should be rewarded within its ecosystem. Hogan's approach to professional wrestling was characterized by what many wrestlers described as ruthless political maneuvering. His creative control clauses and backstage influence led to controversial decisions that prioritized his own interests over the industry's long-term health. The most egregious example might be the finger poke of doom incident in WCW in 1999, where Hogan and Kevin Nash staged a fake fight that mocked fans and contributed to WCW's eventual decline. But perhaps even more damaging was Hogan's pattern of refusing clean losses to younger talent, most notably seen in his botched match against Sting at WCW's Starrcade 1997, where he refused a clean loss and forced a restart after a supposed fast count. This wasn't just ego, it was a systematic undermining of wrestling's fundamental storytelling structure, where veterans are supposed to eventually pass the torch to the next generation. Steve Austin and Mick Foley both accused Hogan of refusing to elevate younger talent, with Austin specifically opting out of potential matches to avoid being undermined by Hogan's backstage machinations. These weren't isolated incidents, but part of a broader pattern that characterized Hogan's entire career. The contrast with Lesnar's approach couldn't have been more stark. When Lesnar returned to WWE in 2012, he didn't demand creative control or special treatment. Instead, he did something that Hogan had rarely done throughout his career. He allowed himself to be positioned as a legitimate threat to the established order, regardless of politics. Lesnar declared, making it clear that he believed success should be determined by ability rather than political maneuvering. This philosophy extended to Lesnar's willingness to make others look legitimate in victory or defeat. His match with The Undertaker at WrestleMania 30, where he ended the streak, was a decision that prioritized long-term storytelling over short-term political considerations. Lesnar understood that his role was to elevate the entire product, even if it meant absorbing losses or making others look stronger. The political ramifications of this approach became apparent when we examine how different wrestlers responded to working with each man. The Undertaker, speaking in a shoot interview, expressed reservations about the NWO's return to WWE, specifically noting concerns about cancer in the locker room and egos that were too big.
And those guys came in with a huge rap on them, you know. I mean, I dealt with them all before in their previous stints here. So, you know, and I'd be lying if I told you I didn't have my reservations about them coming in.
The Undertaker explained. While The Undertaker was specifically discussing the NWO, the broader context of his comments reflected a widespread concern about wrestlers whose primary focus was personal advancement rather than collective success. This sentiment was particularly relevant when considering Hogan's influence during his various runs with different promotions. Lesnar's political approach was fundamentally different because it was based on demonstrated capability rather than manufactured leverage.
I'm a prize fighter, all right? I come to Monday Night Raw to promote fights.
He explained, emphasizing his view of wrestling as legitimate competition rather than predetermined entertainment. This perspective allowed him to work within the system while maintaining his authenticity and credibility. The broader wrestling community's response to these different approaches was telling. While Hogan often found himself embroiled in controversies and backstage tensions, Lesnar's reputation remained largely intact even among wrestlers who had reason to resent his success. Part of this was due to Lesnar's willingness to acknowledge the predetermined nature of wrestling while simultaneously bringing legitimate competitive credentials to his performances. But perhaps the most damaging revelation about Hogan's political approach came through his documented history of fabrications and lies that eroded trust throughout the industry. These included claims about wrestling 400 days a year due to time zones, being scouted by MLB, turning down the George Foreman grill endorsement, and partying with John Belushi after WrestleMania 2, despite Belushi dying in 1982. The most egregious example of Hogan's dishonesty in relation to Lesnar came through his repeated false claims about being the first wrestler to face Lesnar upon his 2012 WWE return after UFC. This was demonstrably false. Lesnar's first post-UFC WWE match was against John Cena at Extreme Rules 2012, and Hogan wasn't even employed by WWE at that time. Hogan repeated this claim multiple times, including on Joe Rogan's podcast in 2023 and in a 2025 TMZ interview, leading to widespread mockery on Reddit and social media. What made these lies particularly damaging was that they represented Hogan's ongoing need to insert himself into other wrestlers' accomplishments, even years after his active career had ended. Lesnar's response to such fabrications was characteristically direct. Rather than engaging in public disputes or attempting to correct the record through media appearances, he let his actions speak for themselves. He stated simply, allowing the contrast between his authentic approach and others' manufactured personas to speak for itself. This authenticity extended to Lesnar's business relationships within the wrestling industry. Unlike Hogan, who was notorious for using his influence to manipulate bookings and maintain his top position, often at others' expense, Lesnar approached his career with what could best be described as professional pragmatism. He understood his value in the marketplace and negotiated accordingly, but without the destructive political maneuvering that characterized Hogan's approach. The most revealing aspect of Lesnar's political philosophy came through his willingness to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about the wrestling business. He explained during one interview, making it clear that he understood the line between entertainment and legitimate competition. He continued with characteristic bluntness. This willingness to acknowledge the brutal realities of professional wrestling stood in stark contrast to Hogan's tendency to mythologize his own experiences and accomplishments. While Hogan built his career on the illusion that his victories were the result of training, prayers, and vitamins, Lesnar was refreshingly honest about the combination of legitimate athletic ability, predetermined outcomes, and professional entertainment that defined modern wrestling. The political implications of this honesty cannot be overstated. By refusing to perpetuate the mythology that had sustained wrestlers like Hogan for decades, Lesnar was essentially arguing for a new model of professional wrestling, one based on legitimate athletic achievement and transparent business practices rather than manufactured drama and backstage manipulation. This philosophical difference became particularly apparent when examining how each man handled career transitions. Hogan's various departures from promotions were often accompanied by lawsuits, burned bridges, and lasting resentments. His time in WCW ended with the company's collapse, partially due to the political chaos he and others had created. His brief stint in TNA was marked by controversies and disputes that damaged relationships throughout the organization. Lesnar's transitions, by contrast, were characterized by mutual respect and maintained relationships. When he left WWE for UFC in 2004, he did so honestly and professionally. In his autobiography, Death Clutch, he was critical of WWE's system but avoided personal attacks on individuals, focusing instead on structural issues within the industry. His return in 2012 was welcomed by the company and fans alike because he had maintained his credibility and reputation during his absence. The final verdict. What Lesnar revealed about Hogan wasn't delivered through explosive interviews or tell-all books. It was communicated through something far more devastating: the simple act of existing as everything Hogan pretended to be, while possessing none of the character flaws that ultimately defined the Hulkster's legacy. The most damaging revelation in this entire saga might be Hogan's 2015 racism scandal, captured in leaked audio from a 2007 sex tape that surfaced during his lawsuit against Gawker Media. In the recording, Hogan repeatedly used racial slurs while expressing discomfort about his daughter Brooke dating a black man, saying things like, "I am a racist" to a point, and making other inflammatory comments. This led to immediate consequences. WWE terminated his contract on July 24, 2015, removed him from their website and Hall of Fame, and halted merchandise sales. The contrast between Hogan's public persona as an all-American hero promoting positive values and his private expressions of racial prejudice couldn't have been starker. Lesnar's response to such controversies was characteristically straightforward. He simply didn't create them.
Just who I am.
Talk to me about that. What do you mean you don't like people?
Stone Cold Steve Austin asked during a revealing interview.
Just don't like being around a bunch of people, and it's kind of ironic because I can go out in an arena full of 20,000 people and be all right with it, only because I feel like I'm in this dome and I'm protected.
Lesnar replied with characteristic honesty. This candid admission revealed something crucial about Lesnar's character. He was genuinely authentic, even when that authenticity might be uncomfortable or unflattering. Unlike Hogan, who crafted a public persona designed to maximize popularity and marketability, Lesnar presented himself exactly as he was, an intensely private, somewhat antisocial athlete who happened to be extraordinarily gifted at combat sports.
That's just who I am. That's why I live out in the middle of nowhere. That's why I got a 8-foot fence around my property. That's why I shut the gate when I come and go. That's just who I am.
Lesnar explained, painting a picture of someone who understood himself and lived according to his nature, rather than according to what others might expect or prefer. This authenticity extended to every aspect of Lesnar's professional presentation. When asked about his motivations for returning to WWE, he was brutally honest. He admitted without any attempt to soften the message or make it more palatable for family-friendly audiences. The implications of this honesty cannot be overstated when contrasted with Hogan's approach to public relations. Throughout his career, Hogan carefully cultivated an image as a role model for children, promoting messages about training, prayers, and vitamins, while privately engaging in behavior that directly contradicted these values. His admission to steroid use during McMahon's 1994 trial, after years of public denials, was just one example of the disconnect between his public persona and private reality. But perhaps the most telling revelation about the fundamental difference between these two men came through their respective approaches to success and failure. When Lesnar suffered his diverticulitis diagnosis and had to step away from UFC competition, he was honest about his health struggles and the impact they had on his career. He didn't attempt to minimize the significance of his condition or create elaborate narratives to protect his image. Hogan's response to setbacks was characteristically different. When faced with the racism scandal, he initially attempted to contextualize and minimize his comments, attributing them to his upbringing and pleading for forgiveness, while simultaneously trying to maintain his status within the industry. The pattern was consistent throughout his career: deflect, minimize, and attempt to control the narrative rather than accepting responsibility and genuine accountability. The wrestling community's response to these different approaches was telling. While many black wrestlers like Mark Henry, Booker T, and JTG expressed hurt and skepticism about Hogan's sincerity following his racism scandal, Lesnar maintained respect across racial and generational lines within the industry. This wasn't because Lesnar was particularly diplomatic or politically correct, quite the opposite. It was because his honesty, even when uncomfortable, was preferable to manufactured personas personas that could be revealed as hypocritical. Upon Hogan's death from cardiac arrest at age 71 in July 2025, media coverage consistently noted his complicated legacy, balancing his wrestling innovations against the numerous scandals that had turned public opinion against him. The fact that his obituaries focused as much on his controversies as his accomplishments spoke volumes about how his reputation had deteriorated over the decades. The broader implications of Lesnar's implicit critique of Hogan extend far beyond individual personalities. What Lesnar represented was a fundamental challenge to the entire system that had allowed figures like Hogan to thrive for so long. By demonstrating that legitimate athletic achievement and authentic personality could coexist with commercial success, Lesnar essentially proved that the political maneuvering and manufactured drama that characterized Hogan's career were unnecessary. This point was driven home during Lesnar's interactions with other wrestling legends. The Undertaker's comments about cancer in the locker room and his reservations about certain returning wrestlers reflected a broader concern within the industry about performers whose primary focus was personal advancement rather than collective success. While The Undertaker wasn't specifically targeting Hogan, his comments reflected the kind of thinking that Lesnar embodied, a preference for performers who elevated the entire product rather than just themselves.
The WWF locker room is completely different from what those guys have ever probably been around. That's a close-knit group of guys. You know what? They all out there to do business, and there's no time for all the BS.
The Undertaker explained, describing exactly the kind of professional environment where someone like Lesnar could thrive while political manipulators might struggle. The timing of these various revelations and interactions creates a compelling narrative about the evolution of professional wrestling itself. As the industry matured and became more transparent about its predetermined nature, performers like Hogan, who had built their careers on manufactured mythology, found themselves increasingly out of step with audience expectations and industry standards. Lesnar's career trajectory represented the future of professional wrestling, athletes who could legitimately compete at the highest levels while understanding and working within the entertainment aspects of the business.
Eat, sleep, kick it, repeat. That's what I do. And I happen to enjoy it, and I'm happy to be very good at it.
He explained with characteristic simplicity, distilling his entire philosophy into a few straightforward sentences. This approach allowed Lesnar to navigate controversies and challenges that might have destroyed careers built on more fragile foundations. When questions arose about his commitment to wrestling versus other pursuits, he was honest about his priorities and motivations, rather than attempting to craft elaborate explanations designed to protect his image. The final verdict on what Lesnar revealed about Hogan is perhaps more damning than any direct accusation could have been. By simply existing as a legitimate athlete who maintained his authenticity while achieving commercial success, Lesnar demonstrated that everything Hogan claimed to represent could be achieved without the lies, manipulation, and political maneuvering that defined the Hulkster's career. The fact that Hogan felt compelled to repeatedly lie about his interactions with Lesnar, claiming credit for matches that never happened and accomplishments he had no part in, only reinforced the impression of someone desperately trying to remain relevant in an industry that had moved beyond his particular brand of manufactured drama. The wrestling industry's response to both men's legacies provides the final piece of this puzzle. While Hogan's influence on wrestling's mainstream popularity cannot be denied, the long-term damage caused by his approach became increasingly apparent as the industry evolved. Multiple wrestlers, from Bret Hart to CM Punk, have gone on record criticizing Hogan's selfishness and political maneuvering, creating a historical record that stands in stark contrast to his carefully crafted public image. Lesnar's legacy, by comparison, remains largely untarnished by the kinds of personal and professional controversies that plagued Hogan throughout his career. Even wrestlers who might have philosophical disagreements with Lesnar's approach generally respect his authenticity and legitimate accomplishments. This difference in industry perception reflects the fundamental divide between performers who elevate the business and those who exploit it for personal gain. The symbolic power of Lesnar's 2014 "Party's over, Grandpa" comment resonates even more strongly when viewed through this lens. It wasn't just a wrestler insulting a legend. It was a generational changing of the guard, delivered by someone who represented everything the next era of professional wrestling could become. Where Hogan represented the old model of manufactured drama and political manipulation, Lesnar embodied a new paradigm of legitimate athletic achievement combined with transparent professionalism. Perhaps most significantly, Lesnar's approach demonstrated that commercial success didn't require the moral compromises that characterized much of Hogan's career. By maintaining his authenticity while achieving mainstream recognition, recognition, Lesnar proved that audiences could appreciate and support performers who refused to compromise their integrity for short-term gains. Lesnar's ongoing career continues to serve as a template for how modern professional wrestlers can navigate the complex demands of entertainment while maintaining their authenticity and integrity. His approach has influenced a generation of performers who understand that long-term success requires more than just political savvy and manufactured drama. The awful truth that Brock Lesnar revealed about Hulk Hogan wasn't contained in any single moment or statement. It was embodied in the living contrast between two fundamentally different approaches to success, integrity, and professional responsibility. Through his actions rather than his words, Lesnar demonstrated that everything Hogan claimed to represent could be achieved more effectively and sustainably through honesty, authenticity, and genuine athletic achievement. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.